Welcome to No Apologies. I'm your host, Dana Lash. All right, so if you glanced at your social media or news or anything this Memorial weekend, you probably saw General Michael Flynn's comments. They caught your attention. I mean, they certainly caught ours. In a conference in Dallas, which was called For God and Country Patriots Roundup, this was a question and answer session, and, well, this took place. Watch.
I want to know why what happened in Myanmar can't happen here.
No reason. I mean, it should happen here. No reason. That's right.
Okay, so, tonight I thought maybe we'd offer a little bit of perspective on this because, we know that there's a ton of tension and intense emotions bubbling up inside of people and in this country. So I want to be, careful, and I want to be fair. And I really think through and go and approach and really think through what Flynn said and offer some perspective. So the hope is to kind of dial down emotions rather than jack them up, obviously. So Legacy Press is going crazy over Flynn's comments like you would expect them to do. But I want to dig a little deeper into the issue and instead of just jumping on this partisan bandwagon like Legacy Press does. So I don't want to offer just some sort of like knee-jerk defense of his comments. So let's be honest, let's delve into some nuance. There's some risk with that, knowing that people are frustrated, though, and disillusioned and still disappointed about the election and the direction that the country seems to be heading in. I get it because I'm right there with you. However, let's back up a bit because context and history matters. So Michael Flynn, General Flynn, under Trump for 22 days, that's when he served under Trump, he was at the center of what is now known as the Russian hoax. If you recall, Flynn was interrogated by FBI agents without a lawyer present during Operation Crossfire Hurricane. The FBI's goal was to set this perjury trap for Flynn, get him to make some misstatements that could later be demonstrated to be lies, causing him to be removed as national security advisor for the Trump administration. So why? Well, it appears that the outgoing Obama administration, they didn't like Flynn's politics. They didn't like his point of view on foreign policy. And so in an attempt to get Flynn to later plead guilty to perjury, it's reported that the DOJ threatened to charge Flynn's son with a FARA violation. That's the Foreign Agents Registration Act. This is a violation, by the way, that the DOJ has almost never charged anyone with. And I've had this conversation before with my friend Andy McCarthy about how the DOJ never really charges anybody with that violation. So Flynn did nothing wrong, but his entire career was destroyed just 22 days into serving for the Trump administration. And sidebar here, too, the Obama-Biden administration, they got a history with going after people high up in the military. It's a very interesting story that we'll talk about another time. Now, Flynn was set up by FBI agents to perjure himself, and his son was threatened with imprisonment if his dad didn't plead guilty. So his case, it was so shady altogether that it was later dismissed. All of this is to say that it's entirely understandable that Flynn would be angry. He has every right to be. His career was destroyed by partisan politics and a corrupt FBI. So I get it. I sympathize with his frustration and his righteous anger. I get that he wants to let the fire of the burning bridges light his path ahead. I get it. That said, the wording was kind of clumsy. I get that it was a Q&A, right? I get that kind of questions are asked and you're on stage and you have to field them. But the question itself, can I be frank, was dumb. It was a dumb question. We can't have a Myanmar here because we're a republic in direct opposition to military control. And we know that Flynn agrees with this because he was already very, very vehemently clearing up any kind of confusion about his words. He was denying that he thinks any kind of a coup is a wise thing to entertain. Now, he also said this on Sunday via the app Telegram, quote, "For all the fake news journalists, let me be very clear. There is no reason whatsoever for any coup in America. And I do not and have not at any time called for any action of that sort. Any reporting of any other belief by me is a bold-faced fabrication based on a twisted reporting at a lively panel at a conference of patriotic Americans who love this country just as I do. I'm no stranger to media manipulating my words, and therefore let me repeat my response to a question asked at the conference. There is no reason it, meaning a coup, should happen here, meaning in America," end quote. Now, we appreciate General Michael Flynn's statement and we think it was wise of him to denounce any perception, intended or not, because it was an encouraging forum. It was loud, it was hard to hear, that he was encouraging some kind of coup in America. I mean, we get it, right? I mean, and we understand why Flynn he's obviously frustrated, and he was in front of a frustrated audience. People who have questions, and the legacy press hasn't been exactly transparent and forthcoming. So when you don't have information, what do? You immediately put speculation or gossip in place of any hard evidence. If only we had an entity that existed to report on the goings-on of our government and share that information with the people. Yes, Flynn's words were clumsy. I get it. It was something that, I mean, you know you're always going to be dissected 6 ways to Sunday. But it is important that we talk about why we want to be careful with any kind of clumsy talk as it relates to coups, okay? First of all, we are not like Democrats. In other words, we do not want our leaders inflaming tensions with just talking about violence and amping up the rhetoric like Democrats do, because that's their gig. That's what they do. That's how they roll. I mean, just watch.
Please don't just come here today and then go home. Go to the Hill today. Get up and please get up in the face of some Congress people.
You cannot be civil with a political party that wants to destroy what you stand for, what you care about.
Let's make sure we show up wherever we have to show up. And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome.
You're in the arena, you gotta be ready to take a punch. You gotta be ready to throw a punch for the children.
But Michelle says that, you know, when they go low, we go high. No. When they go low, we kick them.
They asked me, would I like to debate this gentleman? And I said, no. I said, if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him.
This is how Democrat officials talk. Now remember, they say these kinds of things even after Republican members of Congress were fired on by a Bernie Sanders supporter at it was a baseball game. Remember the congressional baseball game? Steve Scalise nearly died. They said all these types of things when protests and riots were erupting across the country, causing billions of dollars worth of damage. It's anywhere from like $55 million to $1 billion. They're still trying to get the final estimate. This is who the Democrats are. I mean, these people, they just spit venom for their opposition. They conflate humanity with political issues, and they impugn the character of half the country. So it's incredibly important that we do not talk like they talk. Because I get it. When people are frustrated, you're frustrated. But we got to be responsible, especially if you're someone who is under the lens and lights as often as Flynn is. Because I don't believe that words are violence. And I believe that people are responsible for their own actions. However, I do believe that we can set example. And I say this as somebody who's a brawler, so I don't even need to explain that to anybody. But you can't hold the moral high ground if we act like Democrats do, right? And so that's why, and Flynn knows that. That's why he came back and said, quote, there is no reason whatsoever for any coup in America. And secondly, we have to think a little deeper about what Democrats actually want. And is it possible that their party could use another January 6th type of riot? I mean, think about what's happened since the Capitol riot, which broke away from the peaceful protest of people. Oh my goodness, it was, I said this on air, it was a gift that those people gave to the left. Up until then, it was really the left. They were the ones who were out in the streets burning down cities. In fact, they still are. Burning down cities across America, spitting in cops' faces, beating store owners with 2x4s. It was the left violently attacking people, creating autonomous zones and pretending to farm like Chop and Chaz. You remember the leftist mobs that were scratching on the Supreme Court door during the Kavanaugh confirmation? Remember the mob that nearly overran the White House and set fire to the historic St. John's Church? Remember that one? Or the BLM Antifa mobs that went roving into suburban neighborhoods? Because all this violence and stuff is still happening. Portland is a war zone, a place where Antifa violence breaks out on a nightly basis now. Violence is what the left does. There's a history there, and it discredits them. And if there was one moment that helped discredit the right, fair or not, and I don't think it discredited all the right at all, but it was the people who broke away from the peaceful protest on January 6th and decided to go to the People's House, which, by the way, we all pay taxes on that. Those were our windows that got busted out. And yes, we can talk about how it was a smaller group that broke away from the main event. And yes, Trump did say to march to the Capitol peacefully. I can't even believe we're still talking about this. There were all kinds of, I'm not even going to get into it. The press lied. They went with a bunch of other narratives about the one officer, which I believe in backing the blue, which is why I'm glad that the people who were there doing damage were arrested. Yes, arrest them. Yes, charge them. And that's all happening. But there was the lie from the Fourth Estate about this armed insurrection, because it was not this armed insurrection. It wasn't an insurrection. It was a stupid riot of a bunch of gravy seals and people who dressed like they were going to Burning Man. But it played right into Democrats' hands. And Democrats used January 6th to compel big tech to kick off former President Donald Trump from social media, to further deplatform conservatives, to occupy the Capitol with the National Guard for the last 5 months and build up it like it was the Green Zone in Iraq, and build up a wall itself right around the Capitol, which I thought walls were bad. They used January 6th as an excuse to ideologically vet the military for quote unquote white nationalism. They used it to surveil and arrest people that were at the peaceful protests and didn't even go to the riot. And then people that they saw at the riot who wandered into the building, and there was video of some of the Capitol security there saying, if you're peaceful, you're fine. And there were people who were thrown into solitary confinement and all kinds of stuff. I mean, we could do a whole segment on the 400 plus people who have been arrested, many of whom, I mean, we could just, I'm done talking about it because I'm done giving Democrats this kind of air. Nobody's been charged with an insurrection because it wasn't an insurrection, and I'm going to jump off the roof of my house and break my legs off to nubbins if I have to talk about this again. But we can talk about BLM, we can talk about Antifa, but this idea that it's the white supremacy is the most consistent and lethal threat according to Homeland Security, that's a joke. No, all of this has basically been used to inoculate and protect Democrats against charges that they themselves are guilty of. And Democrats are excellent. They're excellent at forming narratives, and they have the entire media complex to carry their water. And really, I think that it was the people who wore the four hats these past 4 years that have demonstrated incredible restraint against the lies and the media abuse and even the violence against it. January 6th is all anybody wants to talk about now, right? You have one riot that broke away from a bigger peaceful protest, but not the hundreds of BLM and Antifa riots. No, January 6th is their entire narrative. AOC says she has trauma from being near it. Nancy Pelosi wants a 9/11 style commission to endlessly investigate it, which, by the way, I don't understand why, because we have a congressional investigation, the FBI, we have arrests, etc. And the intelligence agencies and military are becoming more weaponized against conservatives, all due in part, well, to all of the Democrats' accusations about that. So, do you think that they would, I don't know. It was a gift, like I said, and it was a gift. I'm sure that AOC is going to talk about it way continually still. But it was an opportunity to create crisis, and all of the Democrat policy moves forward by creating hysteria and crisis. So this is why Flynn's wording, it being clumsy, long story short, why it was clumsy, and I'm glad that he cleared it up. And of course, the opposite of his intent is going to be more widely discussed than his remarks after. I mean, heaven forbid, should any event like that happen again, I'm sure we can expect the same from the media and Democrats. They will fully exploit it. Big tech will increase censorship online, and they'll brand all Republicans as bad, horrible terrorists, and they'll continue to excuse their violence and fully condemn and prosecute any hint of violence on the right. It's not fair, but that is the reality. And we're better than them anyway. And we shouldn't want to be better than them just because they're the left and we're the right and we try to get one up on them. We should want to be better than them because what? That's right, we're people of faith and we are a republic first. Everybody equal before the law and everyone equal underneath it when it's broken. Now, finally, Memorial Day weekend, because that was one thing that happened this week. And in light of all of those who died for this country to preserve our American freedoms, we have to make sure that our words are careful and wise, especially now because the country is pretty divided. There's a palpable sense of factionalism in the air. I mean, you have people who don't even talk to neighbors who don't even talk to each other, families who aren't on speaking terms, communities that are divided by just ridiculous political tribalism. And we know this. Let's not add to the tribalism and let's not emulate it, right? So show up and vote. Get involved in a grassroots level. Make a positive impact in your community. Persuade hearts and minds, right? Churchill once said this about the American people, quote, "You can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted all other possibilities," end quote. So let's show that there is a better possibility and a better path than the one that's offered by Democrats. And we do this by just showing that we're the reasonable ones. We're selling freedom, the logical ones, the ones speaking truth and wisdom and appealing to people's betters, by summoning the better angels of the American people and by not responding to ridiculous over-the-top tribalism with ridiculous over-the-top tribalism. So let the left expose themselves for corruption and anger and all of that stuff, because that's not what the country stands for. And we don't want to transform it into that. That's not us. So no more coups, no more talk of coups, no more talk of waging war, all of this stuff. No, the battlefield of ideas is out in the community, and we have a great product, freedom, and we can persuade people to come to that. That's the way we win the battle for America's soul. So next up, Governor Pete Ricketts of Nebraska. We're going to discuss with him his fight against that 30-30 plan from the Biden administration. It's all about, they say, conserving 30% of America's land and water, and to do it by 2030, right? All for climate change. But it kind of looks like a pretext for a federal government land grab. We're going to discuss that. Keep it here. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company serving premium coffee to people who love America. Veteran CEO and founder Evan Hafer spent 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces and as a CIA contractor. Black Rifle Coffee is committed to Evan's mission of supporting veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. In our country and overseas, frontline workers risk their lives daily. And so, inspired by their courage, Black Rifle Coffee wants to give back to those who serve however they can. So throughout May, which has already passed, Black Rifle Coffee is going to be rallying behind firefighters, first responders, active duty, military, and other frontline workers by spotlighting local heroes through community nominations, donating coffee to keep the front lines caffeinated, and giving back to organizations that support our nation's heroes. Their high-quality coffee beans are imported from all over the world and then roasted for 5 days a week at their facilities in Tennessee and Utah, bringing you the freshest coffee in America. So head to blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV to order yours and use code DanaTV at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. We are excited to welcome Governor Pete Ricketts of Nebraska to the program. He is on a mission to stop Joe Biden's 30 by 30 plan, and this is purportedly about fighting climate change and conserving land. But quite honestly, when you look at some of the details that are available, it does look like a federal land grab. Governor, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. And it is absolutely a land grab.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the details of this, and they were really sketchy about what they were releasing and what they were telling people about it. And for me, I just kept thinking back to the Bureau of Land Management under Obama Biden, and that was, I mean, the Bureau of Land Management. That's when BLM stood for something different. And they were very, very aggressive in going after farmers and ranchers. And I mean, they were looking up at the, northern Texas, southern Oklahoma. And with this, I mean, it's kind of like the same old, same old. I mean, at least it seems like that to me. This really, Governor, doesn't have anything to do with conservation. So tell us about that for those who may not be familiar.
Yeah, the 30 by 30 plan refers to having 30% of the U.S. land and waters in a permanent state of natural conservation by the year 2030, which of course is only 9 years away. And if you want to put that in comparison, according to the National Geographic, about 12% of our land would be in that category right now, or about 289 million acres. And this would take it up to 729 million acres, or add about 440 million acres on top of that. And the problems with this are really numerous. One, that the Biden administration, the president himself, has no authority to do this. And so our first question was, how do you plan to do that? The second is, what about states like Nebraska, where 97% of our land is privately owned? Are you planning on confiscating land? How do you intend on doing this? We were told that a number of congressional offices also asked the Department of Interior about this plan, and what they responded back was that they were going to use every tool in the toolbox, which to me sounds very scary. And there's a number of ways they could do it. They could do it through lands that are adjacent to national parks or state parks or wildlife refuges. They could use permanent easements, which would permanently lock up land, or they could use it wherever they have that nexus of the federal government on environmental matters to really make those regulations much more onerous. I'll give you one quick example. CRP land land that is put into conservation by farmers and they get paid to do so, they can start putting more environmental qualifications on that, like you have to protect the habitat. In fact, I was speaking with one rancher in western Nebraska who was told that to renew his CRP agreement, he would have to protect the habitat of the swift fox he says he's never seen a swift fox, and said, what would it mean to protect the habitat? What would that habitat be? And the USDA, which administers the CRP program, couldn't tell him. They didn't know. And that is very troubling, because that means that they're making up rules and that you may not know what you're signing, and then they come back later on and starting enforcing these rules and basically take away your property rights. And that's what this really gets down to, is a land grab by the federal government to remove people's private property rights.
Yeah, and that's very interesting, Governor, the whole situation with the fox, because this is something similar that I've read in other parts of the country, where the government's like, we need to protect the habitat of such and such animal. We can't actually define everything about it or what you would need to do this, but we really feel like this is something that needs to be done. But you hit upon something incredibly important to me, where we've been having this larger discussion in the country about the shadow of Marxism and the prevailing Marxist culture that is sweeping across the nation. I mean, I'm just saying, if you were promoting Marxist culture or a Marxist, economic principle, obliterating people's private property rights is a great first step.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know where the genesis of all this comes from. It's coming from the United Nations. Back in 1992, they are the ones that started setting goals for how much land should be in conservation. And there's also a movement out there called the Half Earth movement, which is really setting aside half the Earth's land and water into this permanent natural conservation. And all of this is really only able to happen if you have a federal takeover of that land. If the federal government really believed in conservation, if that was the goal, they would leave it up to us here in Nebraska to determine that, because nobody cares more about our land and water than we do, and our air than we do here in Nebraska. In fact, through conservation efforts that we've had here and this regulatory scheme we've set up in our state, we've kept things like our Ogallala Aquifer, which is one of the largest underground aquifers in the world. In Nebraska, it's within 1 foot of where it was back in the 1950s because of the good management practices we've had here. So our farmers and ranchers were the original conservationists. They were the ones that wanted to pass on the family farm and ranch to the next generation. We don't need the federal government coming in here and taking away our private property rights in the name of conservation. We do a great job here. And by the way, according to U.S. News and World Report, Nebraska has the 6th best natural environment. Delaware, the president's home state, has the 6th worst. Maybe the president should focus on his home state of Delaware and leave us alone here in Nebraska.
Yeah, Governor, it sounds like your state of Nebraska has it really figured out. And that's one of the other points that you brought up that I find really troubling, is that they've never actually explained, when you're talking about Nebraskans and elsewhere in the country, these people's private property. I mean, this sounds like eminent domain, but they don't want to actually go out and say that that's what they're going to invoke.
Yeah, and it's something that, for eminent domain, you've got to have a purpose that you're doing. This is just for national conservation. So again, there's no authority to actually do this.
Right.
The president would have to work with Congress to get something passed. And that's why I led a group of 15 governors to send the president a letter asking for more details about what the president actually meant by this 30 by 30 plan.
And isn't there, if memory serves, a significant number of land, state by state, a significant percentage of land that is already federally regulated. It's just not clear to me as to why the federal government thinks that there needs to be more put into conservation, because as you said, the people who best know this land are the farmers and ranchers and the people who own it, not these bureaucrats in the United Nations, some of whom have never even stepped foot in this country, much less middle America.
Yeah, this, as I mentioned, goes back to the UN starting this. And then there was a Center for American Progress paper published in August 2019 that set out the 30% goal. And it's not based on any science or any data. If you look at the references that they have in their paper, it's mostly referring back to the press releases of other environmental groups. So there isn't any really data or science behind why they picked 30%. And of course, if you thought that when they got 30%, they would stop, that's just not the case. They're going to continue to push until they get that 50% number, which is ultimately these radical environmentalist goal.
Yeah. Oh, this is something else. Governor, now I understand you're having town halls across the state to raise awareness. Although I think a lot of people, from the discussion I've seen online, a lot of people are very aware of what's happening here. But you're doing a number of town halls across the state of Nebraska. And I know a number of other elected officials have been reaching out to their constituents. Tell me what you would most like people to walk away with, what information that they can walk away with, and what they need to do to help you fight back against this.
Yeah, what we're trying to do with our town halls, when we get a couple hundred people showing up to these town halls are well attended, is to really make them aware of how all the different ways the federal government might do this. The big message is, look, we often think of DC being far away and the fights there maybe don't relate to our lives directly. But in this case, we're the front line in Nebraska. We're in the trenches here because the federal government is looking to do this in a number of different ways, such as permanent easements, the CRP land, land next to wildlife refuges and things like that. So we're asking people to be on guard and aware in their local areas. They're going to try to do this in a stealth way. They say it's voluntary, but they're really meaning not voluntary. They're going to try and find ways to force people to do it through regulation. And we need to be on guard in a local way to find those places where the federal government's going to try and do that so that we can be taking steps to mitigate that, prevent that, educate people. Don't just sign a new contract, read the fine print, understand what they're trying to accomplish, because if you sign something that, for example, puts land into permanent easement, that never gets fixed.
Oh, yeah, that's once it's done, it's done and set. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this is, I mean, it's troubling, and I'm glad, and I'm just looking at just some of my latest information. I'm just glad that you're raising awareness of this and bringing people to speed on all of this. Governor Pete Ricketts, thank you so much. I know we talked on radio. I'd love to have you on again, either here on No Apologies or on radio too. Thank you, Governor, for your time. I appreciate what you do.
Great. Well, hey, thank you very much, Dana. I would love to come on again.
Of course. All right, folks, next up, my friend, actor and filmmaker, and if I don't say Peabody Award winner, that's going to be the first complaint I'll hear when I have him on. Nick Searcy is going to join us to discuss woke Hollywood and his latest documentary, America, America, God Shed His Grace on Thee. Keep it here. So, folks, after the program, I want all of you to visit this website, preparewiththefirst.com. It is a special website set up by our friends at My Patriot Supply. And every day it seems like, things are kind of nuttier, right? I mean, who knows? I mean, the best way to have peace of mind is to have your emergency food and water rations, right? I have my prepper pantry. Do you? My Patriot Supply is America's leading preparedness. I have some of that in my prepper pantry, by the way. It's the leading preparedness company. They're here to help you become self-reliant. So no matter what happens next, you're ready. But you can't wait for something bad to happen and then react. You should act now before there's like a stock market crash or hyperinflation, civil unrest. You know what? Let me put it this way. Act now and don't be like the people in all the zombie movies that have to leave their safe, secure area to go out and forage for food and supplies, because you want to have that all in your prepper pantry, okay? My Patriot Supply has been in business for over a dozen years, serving millions of families and earning 39,000 4-star and 5-star reviews. Their food, specially packaged to stay fresh for up to 25 years. So when you prepare today, it'll be there when you need it. Right now, you can save $50 on their 4-week emergency food kit at preparewiththefirst.com. The meals are delicious. They provide 2,000 calories per day. No other brand comes close. That's preparewiththefirst.com. We are joined by my friend, actor and filmmaker, Peabody Award winner, and the only talented person in Hollywood, Nick Searcy. He's here to discuss woke Hollywood, as well as his latest documentary, which is out now, America, America, God Shed His Grace on Thee, which explores the importance of the Judeo-Christian values at the core of America. Nick, I like your hat. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dana. This hat was a gift. A friend of mine said, you've got to go and make America talented again. That's my mission. That's what I'm doing.
Yes. I got to ask you about your new film, because you're based in LA. You're based in California, and you went to DC. And I have to ask you, in your new film, you talked to everybody. And I was looking at my note. You didn't talk to me. We didn't miss any calls. I checked with the producers. But joking, not really joking aside, why did you went from the frying pan to the fire, from California to DC, and you were by all of these magnificent structures that all have, scripture and some really great quotes from the Bible that are carved into the walls of these buildings. I mean, I was looking at my notes of where all you went. Has anybody stopped in DC to ask themselves, why are all of these godly reminders written on the walls of like the buildings in one of the most ungodly towns in America?
Well, I think that's part of what we're up against here. I mean, in this film, we explore basically that the Constitution and the country was built on the Bible and Judeo-Christian principles. It's built into almost every building in D.C., every monument and everything. And I think that what the left has tried to do over the decades is remove God, separate this country from God, and that is the battle that we have. That's what we're up against. They're trying to make it unfashionable and uncool to actually acknowledge the fact that this country was built on the idea of a personal relationship with God.
And that also means personal responsibility and accountability for the person that has that relationship. Isn't that kind of, and I know you've talked about this, to an extent on Twitter and elsewhere, but isn't that, I mean, it seems like, communism, whether it's cultural, whether it's economic, whatever, tyranny doesn't want a competitor. Any kind of big brother, anything does not want a competitor. And a competitor for control is belief in something that actually gives free will, whereas Karl Marx never believed in free will, but God grants it freely. Isn't that really, do you think that that's why they really focus on it?
You bet. I mean, in order to have perfect allegiance to the state, you can't have a higher power than the government. And so anything that threatens that's why Lenin and Stalin and all the communist countries, they always do away with religion. They always close the churches because you can only have one allegiance. They don't even want you to have allegiance to your partner. That's why the BLM movement is against the nuclear family. The only allegiance that's allowed is your allegiance to the state.
How is that not a red flag to people? That's what I will never understand. I mean, they're telling you you can't have allegiance to anything other than us, not even anything that represents good, not even your spouse or your family. I mean, most people, you and me, we hear stuff like that and we're like, that's like straight up devilish. That's terrifying. But yet, why don't people see it that way?
Well, I think that what they've done is they've done the long march through the institutions that they said they were going to do, and they have basically brainwashed generations of our children, of Americans. I mean, I think the millennials that are now 30 years old, they've been raised on all their public education, all their higher education, and even every TV show they watch has been sending this message that Christians are hypocrites, Republicans are evil, this country is racist. Everything about this country was founded on evil, and all that stuff has sunk in so that now that's their given. I was raised at a time when we were taught the evils of communism, and we were taught that this country was exceptional and built on personal freedom and individual liberty. And that has all been undermined intentionally for decades, and now we're reaping the benefits of that.
Yeah, everybody has to, it's got to be like the Borg. Everybody has to be hive mind. No, there cannot be any kind of question because that's looked at as, a betrayal. And that kind of gets us into what's been happening. I think it's been happening for a long time in your industry. It's been happening for a long time. Everyone likes to say Hollywood, like it's like this other planet, which it kind of is in a way. I don't know how, because you've won so many awards and you're respected as an actor. You have to get, I think, to your level to have, like we always say, like, of people like J.K. Rowling, she has don't screw with me money. You have like a don't screw with me record and a body of work. So, you're able, I think, to be able to express certain things and say certain things, because if you were just getting started in the industry, they'd cancel you just right quick.
Yeah, I mean, thank God I'm rich. But it really, it is now that I think what's happened now in Hollywood is that they have become so much of an insular culture that we also have a culture now that is totally splintered. So it's not ever going to be the situation again where everybody in the country is watching the last episode of Seinfeld, or everybody in the country is watching the last episode of MASH. Everything is just a niche entertainment now. And so I think what we as conservatives have to face is that we're going to have to build an alternative to Hollywood. Mm-hmm. It's not enough to just sit around and go, I'm not paying attention to Hollywood. Those people don't speak for me, because those people are speaking to our children. And we have to build a platform that gives our children and their children an alternative from this poison that is being constantly injected into our veins from the popular culture.
You brought up something that I find fascinating, and I think like when certain shows end, they keep talking about it like the end of what these water cooler moments, right? Like there used to be a time when everybody would be able to come together at the water cooler and talk. Oh, did you watch such and such sitcom last night, or did you read such and such book? And we had these like cultural touch points that we all could identify with simultaneously, regardless of background or demo. But now, as you said, everything is niche, like we're all broken up, which is good because more voices, not fewer voices. But at the same time, I think we have, as a culture, as an American culture, kind of lost that common ground touch point place. I don't know if there's anything that could be that. Sports, I think sports was maybe it, but that's been ruined at this point.
Yeah, and sadly, I think that's been intentional. I think that the intent of the left has been to divide us and pit us against each other, one tribe against each other. That is their strategy. And so by basically denying the unifying culture that is the Judeo-Christian principles that this country was founded on, they have splintered us into a million pieces. And it's going to be hard for us to all get back together again because that is their intent. They want to drive us apart. They talk about unity, but they have no intention of actually unifying us. They want us driven apart and pitted against each other because then that's how they get votes. Vote for me and I'll protect you from that evil guy over there. And so that's where we are.
Yeah, it's like a hurt and rescue tactic. Absolutely. I mean, and talking of like the cancel culture and the cancellation of people, one thing that I've noticed is that as it relates to arts and entertainment, it seems like the people that, like when Weinstein finally got canceled, when he finally got the justice due to him, it was like a payment that the industry and that the left could afford to make. It was almost like, oh, well, here's a pittance. We'll throw this out because we can sacrifice this finally because we can. Or like Chrissy Teigen and all that stuff. I mean, she's kind of annoying. I mean, that's why I like that. That's why they could do that. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, is that accurate to say? I mean, the only people that are ever kind of like that they sacrifice in terms of cancel culture are those that they can afford to do so that they can look like they're holding themselves to account to.
I think that's true. I think they basically used Weinstein up. We got everything we needed out of him. Now we can let him go. And I think that's part of the hypocrisy of the way they do business out here. It isn't so much driven by principle as it is driven by, okay, I've already gotten mine, so we don't need to save him anymore. We don't need to prop him up. He's indefensible, so let's let him go. When they all knew it was happening while it was going on.
Oh yeah, completely. In your film, your documentary that you've done, I'm curious. I know the founders have written a lot about this. We got to get all angles of that hat, so it also has to be completely make sure you get it.
I'm seeing
if you just walked out with that hat and because you do these, I have to tell people, Nick does these, what he calls, it's very Monty Python-esque, the unnecessary walks, because at one point, was it Newsom or was it Garcetti who said that you can't go out and walk around because you'll spread the virus? So Nick Tate records himself, he goes live, and he goes on unnecessary walks, like he's daring people to arrest him. And I'm just thinking, you wear that hat out, they won't even care what it says. People will just react to the fact that it's a hat that is red. I'm sure that you've come across that.
They just see the red hat and they go crazy. I get a whole lot of bad look, especially since I'm also the only one outside in Los Angeles that's not wearing a mask. Everybody wears a mask. It's crazy. I saw two guys playing tennis. They were playing tennis and they were wearing masks. I'm not kidding. It's crazy.
That sport didn't even require. Oh my gosh! That poor state. You need to come to Texas instead of going to DC. You need to come to Texas. Speaking of which, the founders wrote a lot about.
I've been doing stand-up comedy lately, and one of the jokes I tell is that you see people riding around their cars with their mask on by themselves with their mask on. What do they think they're going to get it from the radio? And then they laugh a little bit, and I go, well, if they're listening to CNN, they might, and everybody likes that.
They might get it. I like that. I like that's a good joke. I like it's a good joke. How important is virtue in relation to freedom?
Well, John Adams famously said, and this is in my movie, shedisgrace.com is the website, but John Adams famously said, this country was designed for a moral and religious people, and it is wholly inadequate to govern any other kind of people. And I think that's what we're going through. you have to have a people that have a sense of honor and decency and honesty in order for the Constitution to work. And so what we're faced with now is, basically an entire political party that has no regard for truth. The only thing it cares for is tactics and success. So that's why I think in many ways we are in trouble as a nation right now.
And trouble as a nation. And you also mentioned, which I like the point that you made, how you kind of have to create something that is going to compete against this, everything else that's been out there forever that that our kids are being exposed to. I had a whole segment on radio today just talking about what they're doing to Blue's Clues and some of the other videos that they're showing now at some of these schools. It's and what they're promoting. It's kind of crazy. But that has always kind of been a problem for the right, for conservatives, because you have people that don't invest in tech that is maybe perhaps libertarian or conservative owned, or art and entertainment, films that are conservative films. It's kind of hard. I've noticed, friends that have gone the route that you have. I mean, they're not all Nick Searcy, Peabody Award winner, but they've talked about how kind of difficult it is to kind of get it started. Talk a little bit about your experiences in that, because I don't think that the right's stingy. I just feel as though this has been such an unappreciated portion of American culture that now we're seeing the consequence of it.
Yeah, I think conservative investors in the past have just sort of not given pop culture, the weight and importance that it deserves, and so conservative investors are also sort of sensible investors by and large, and so making movies and that kind of thing, that's generally not a great investment. That's a disposable income kind of investment. And so what I've been working with a group called Creado, C-R-E-A-D, Creado Media, and they're trying to build a platform that has its own servers, that is not beholden to Amazon, and that the left can't shut down like they did to Parler and like they did to other apps that came up to compete with Twitter and Facebook. And that's what we have to do. Conservative investors have to get their heads around this idea that we have to play the long game just like they did. And we have to invest in these things that they cannot destroy. Because right now, if we're using their servers and we're using their tech, they can just turn us off if they don't like what we're doing, which is what they're doing on almost every social media platform there is. If they don't like what you're saying, they don't have to kill you anymore. They can just shut you down. They can just turn you off and erase you, and they don't literally have to go to the trouble of actually murdering you.
Yeah, that's just, it's unbelievable. One last quick question for you, Nick, because I noticed you tweeted about Barbara Streisand. And I have to tell people this, on one of Nick's unnecessary walks, it was one of the saloons, and I talked to the owner. What was it, Tin Horn Flats out there in California? That's how I learned about them through you. And I know the city was trying to shut them down and trying to keep them from reopening, and even like trying to lock their doors, putting sandbags out. And you had actually been by there, and that's why I was watching one of the things that you did, and I was just shocked that they were, all these months later, still trying to enforce something that was months and months prior. But it was interesting because I had that in mind, and I saw your retweet of an article in which Barbara Streisand was saying, it's the Republican Party, really, they are the authoritarians here. That didn't really seem like that when I was watching on your walk, Nick.
No, it's not the Republican Party that's shutting down a restaurant right now, because basically they have to make an example out of Tin Horn Flats. It's like, you resisted us, even though what we told you to do doesn't make any sense. You resisted us, and now we have to make an example out of you to make sure that no one else ever resists us again. And that's really what the left is doing. Barbara Streisand, who I actually worked with once in Prince of Tides a long time ago.
I know.
But she has it exactly. It's not the right that's insisting on vaccine passports. It's not the right that's trying to shut down restaurants that disobey their illegal mask mandates. It's the left. It's the Democrat Party.
No, it is. It is. Bringing class, sophistication, and world-renowned acting to the real resistance. It's Nick Searcy. Nick, it's always a pleasure. And make sure that you come say hi to us when you come to Texas.
If I ever make another documentary, I promise you'll be in it.
I'm going to have everybody note that right now because we're going to hold you to it, and I will intro you next time if it doesn't happen with that exact soundbite. We're going to do it. Nick, good to see you. God bless. Oh, goodness, this is a hard topic. It is. It's like one of those come to Jesus moments, right? But the cavalry isn't coming because you know why? The cavalry is us. It's time to step up. My thoughts when we return. So I want to finish today's show with this thought. The cavalry is you. Nobody is coming to save us. The problem with all of the rhetoric about military coups, like the question that was asked about of Michael Flynn this weekend in Dallas, or Trump coming back on a white horse, or the Supreme Court coming to save us, yeah, that's la la land, because it distracts us from what we really should be doing. Many end up kind of sitting around talking about Red Dawn scenarios, and it's a distraction. See, it's easier to entertain fantasies of some kind of action, I guess, like that, or some sort of uprising, some hero coming in like the cavalry to save the United States. Why? Because it lets us off the hook. Somebody else will just do the hard work, and we'll just grab some popcorn and we'll root from the stands. And yet too often we're not on the field where the action's happening. I mean, we're conservatives. We shouldn't outsource this stuff. I get it that we're not activists, right? And so too often we don't speak up, even in our own communities. Maybe we're afraid of being judged by our neighbors or family members, and so we don't show up at school board meetings or challenge things like critical race theory, for instance. And we sometimes don't even do the simple work of seeing what our kids are learning in school and making sure they're not being indoctrinated to hate not just America, but each other. We keep on funding our alma maters while they teach hatred for America. And the fact is, most of these universities are dominated people that are absolutely opposed to you and what you believe. And often we talk about God, but we're not even living out our faith in front of our kids. And we wonder how America got here. It got here because we were asleep at the wheel while the radical left was furiously at work. And now the fight has come to our doorstep. We didn't want this fight, but it's here. And instead of joking around about coups, we got to get in the game, all of us. I mean, do you really think that people would actually fight in some physical civil war if we couldn't get those same people to show up to vote? Even in historically red Georgia, where we had 2 Republican senators that we couldn't get elected in a special election. And yes, we understand that people feel, I get it, that there was something wrong with that election. But there's also some data that shows that Republican voters just didn't show up. Republicans have always had a problem, by the way, historically with turnout. That's simple fact. I've looked at the raw numbers at numerous election nights. I've seen the data. So we got to get involved, and we got to turn off the NBA and the MLB, because if they're going to just, vomit all over the country and bow down to the Chinese Communist Party, turn them off. Cancel subscriptions. Stop buying from corporations who hate you. Move to a state that represents your values, or stake out your claim in your state and fight for your values there. See, the problem with thinking that some kind of cavalry is coming is that it relieves you and me from doing what we need to do. And far too long, we just kind of sat back and we expected, honestly, Trump to do it, or the Republican Party. But that's not how it goes. They can only do so much, right? I mean, if there was one thing that Trump demonstrated, it's that you got to put some skin in the game. You have to risk something. Don't you think liberty and freedom are worth risking for? Don't you think it's worth risking for that? In fact, it's worth risking everything for. So get off the bench. Don't outsource your civic duty. I get it, you're busy, you got work, you're trying to keep a roof over your heads, but come on, you can do it, the founders could do it, everybody else can do it, so can you. Let's not waste time. Meanwhile, Democrats, they're on the ground, infiltrating every school board, every city council, every police department, every branch of government in every state in the country. That's what we need to be doing, not wasting time on any kind of Red Dawn Hollywood fantasies. As Memorial Day reminds us, the common everyday American is the one who has always and will always risk everything to preserve and defend America. Those white tombstones, that's the cavalry. The cavalry is also you. That does it for us tonight. We'll see you back here tomorrow for more. God bless, and don't ever bend that knee.